Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends. Welcome back to r/EntitledPeople, where you'll hear absolutely ridiculous stories about people who believe they can do no wrong and that the world revolves around them. Guys, so these stories today, you gotta fasten those seatbelts because I almost flew out of my chair reading these stories. I'll start off with a short one to get you warmed up, and the two after that, oh boy, you're in for a treat. I do hope you enjoy the stories today, and remember, don't shake your head too much because it might fall off. Oh, and do hit that subscribe button for future stories if you're new here. So, this story still makes me sorta angry giggle when I think about it. So, last year was my mom's 60th birthday. With lockdown, we couldn't really do a big party, but instead, we did a socially distanced meal for her. She wanted a steak dinner with all the trimmings, so I went down to the supermarket a few days beforehand. The said supermarket has these specially cut steaks in vacuum packs, and there was a deal of 3 for £10. I was choosing steaks and noticed a woman close by doing the same and picking up several. I took my 3, put them in my trolley, and moved on. I moved on and got the remainder of my list, and then thought about getting wine. Now, this is the point where I moved away from my trolley to get the wine. When I came back, that customer from before was leaning over my trolley. So I said, Hi, this is my trolley. She says, Oh, I know, I'm just taking one of your steaks. I asked her, why? I chose those. You were there too, and I saw you pick some up. She says, Right, but I got 14 and I need one more. I told her I only have 3. You're not taking one of mine. I deliberately pulled my trolley away from her at this point, and she says, You have to. I need it for the multi-deal. And I replied, And I need it to feed 3 people. So at this point, she's red in the face by now, and she says, I'll go get a manager then. I told her to go ahead. She runs off, and I finish choosing my wine. 5 minutes later, I'm waiting to get checked out when the lady comes over with a manager. She stood back with this smug look on her face while the manager came over. The manager says, Ma'am, this lady says you stole one of her steaks from her trolley. Is that true? I told the manager, no, I picked up 3 at the freezer and then later on found her leaning over my trolley and saying she would take one. She says she needs it for the multi-deal. The manager then sighed and says, I knew it. She does this. I'm sorry to trouble you. Enjoy your day. The manager then sighed again and walked away. As I checked out, I saw him guiding her away from the till points. A few minutes later, I heard a security to the meat aisle announcement as I was leaving. The steaks were lovely, but not worth stealing from someone else's trolley. I'm sure Karen would disagree with that. This is unreal. Imagine being so entitled that you take food from somebody else's grocery cart just so you could fulfill the 3 for $10 deal that's going on. Listen, I don't even know why I'm still surprised at this point. I've read countless stories like this, and I swear, every time it's like I forget how entitled some people can be. So, I've been living in Japan for a little over 2 years with my husband. He was born here, and we decided to move to his hometown. It's a small city, but there's enough to do without getting bored. Now, before I go on, I want to say that I'm a white female. Relationships like ours are not so common here, and it can feel like we're some rare shiny Pokemon, as in rural Japan, there's a lot of staring, occasional secret picture, or even small chats if an old lady's brave enough to approach us. It can feel uncomfortable eating at restaurants because kids will turn around in their seat and stare at us the whole time with an open fish mouth. Coincidentally, there's a small US military base located in the city. The closer you are to downtown, the more American families you'll see. I'm constantly being mistaken for being military by Americans, and Japanese, which is understandable. So besides myself, I only know 5 other interracial marriages here. It's always locals who ask about my American husband when I'm out alone, which I respond in Japanese that my husband is Japanese and I live here, or something along those lines. Americans will never ask about my marriage as they assume my spouse is American. Now, I also want to note that when we're together in public, we do abnormal couple behavior things, such as holding hands. Couples here rarely hold hands in public. We don't go downtown too often since it's all paid to park and it's a nightmare to find a place. It was a beautiful warm day for the first time in months, so we decided to battle for a spot and walk around the shops. The crowd was heavy, since the weather was great and the winter was ending. The season for new American families to move here just finished, so I'm sure this was many people's first time to leisurely walk around and shop outside. We find a parking spot and make our way to the outside shops. Of course, we're holding hands and casually talking and laughing. All of a sudden, I hear this from an American woman about 10 feet behind us. She says, "Wow!" Now, you should know that a Japanese stereotype against Americans is that we're rude and obnoxiously loud. And this wow was loud enough for me to turn my head around at the noise. She was with 2 other moms who had like 3 kids each. They were staring at me, but perhaps we just accidentally had eye contact at the right time. I try to ignore her, but at this point she's basically screaming, "Seriously? Another little homewrecker is doing this in public?" I'm thinking, chill woman, you're so loud that even I can hear you. We find a table nearby at the Starbucks outside. We were enjoying our drinks when the same group of women approached us with their strollers in tow. Now, they definitely had some sort of purpose with something to say to us. So let's call her Karen for the story's sake. She says, "Excuse me, but you need to keep whatever you're doing in your messed up home. Doing that in public in front of families to see is disgusting and immoral. My kids don't need to see such a bad display of marriage." Now, I'm so confused, as was my husband who can speak fluent English. Who knew that drinking coffee outside was a crime against humanity and marriage? I asked, I'm sorry, what did we do? Karen says, "You know exactly what you're doing." She points to my wedding ring. And I said, "No, I don't." Karen responds, "Good lord, does your husband know about this? Is he on a ship right now?" That's so like a dependopotamus. Her friends start to laugh. Now, in case you don't speak military, a dependopotamus is a slang for a military wife who stays at home all day, doesn't clean, uses their spouse as an ATM, and looks like Jabba the Hutt. Now, it dawns on me that she thinks that I'm a military spouse and that I'm cheating on my American husband. I start to laugh because she's suggesting that I'm cheating on my husband with my husband. I told her, this is my spouse. I'm actually not part of the military community, and I have a Japanese visa. Karen looks my significant other up and down. The 2 women behind her apologize, but Karen holds her ground, as she doesn't believe it. She says, "No one would want to voluntarily live in this little town." Nice lie, but you're not representing the military community. She then goes on and says, "You make all of us wives look like whores. Who's your husband and what's his rank? Also, I need your dependent ID. My husband is a high rank, so he'll make sure your husband is aware of your infidelity." She then pulls out her phone to probably type my response, and I'm offended since this is actually a nice place to live and very open to foreigners. I tell Karen, "Look, my husband's name is so-and-so and he's sitting right here. I'm not going to show you my military ID since I don't have one and you're not the police. As proof, you can obviously see our wedding bands match and here's a picture to prove it." I show her my phone screen, which is of us in traditional Japanese clothes on our wedding day. Her eyes became huge at the picture. Her 2 friends at this point and their hellspawn have already started to walk away. At this point, she says something so insane. Karen says, "Why are you in a relationship with him? You should be in a normal relationship and start having a family with American kids." It's so ironic because we're in Japan and she's fussing about me being married to a Japanese man. My husband's been quiet throughout the whole exchange and he says to me that we should go. I agree and stood up. I told her, "Stop. The things you're saying are extremely offensive. I was part of the military community myself a few years ago, and what you're doing is against spousal conduct." So Karen smirks and says, "Go ahead and tell people what I did then. My high-ranking husband is an E7, and everything's gonna be swept under the rug no matter what happens. You can't touch me." Now, I want to note that this is a small military community. If someone does something minor, it's talked about between the wives like chickens. Later that day, I run into my friend who works on the base, and she's well known in the community for being one of the main event coordinators. I don't miss this chance to comply with Karen's demand, and explain to my friend about the exchange and how it made my husband extremely uncomfortable with her remarks. She asked me if this person looked like so-and-so, which I said yes. My friend rolls her eyes, and she says, "She just arrived a couple of months ago, and she's already causing problems with rumors and drama. It looks like we have a racist too, so I'll make sure what she said is passed on." It's been half a year later, and I didn't hear anything about Karen again since I distanced myself from making military friends here. That is, until now. So last week, I ran into my friend who's getting ready to leave back to the United States. We had a little discussion about her moving and my family planning, and she dropped a bombshell. She said, "Do you remember that woman who accused you of cheating on your non-existent military spouse and called your husband a racist name?" I said, "Of course, I haven't heard anything from her since." My friend tells me, well, I mentioned that we were already having problems with her not long after she got here. I told my boss there's a person who was bothering and threatening civilians and asking for IDs, which isn't allowed for somebody with her status. My boss was extremely interested after I mentioned her name because Karen was scheduled for an interview in my department. I suggested we look at her social media accounts from her past behavior because we don't tolerate that type of behavior. Her social media was shocking. While she set her Facebook to private, her Twitter was littered with malicious tweets and retweets. This included racism towards many nationalities, colorful language, and using her husband's military rank to bully others. She made it very clear that she wants her current city to burn to the ground, and why would anyone want to learn Japanese since it sounds terrible? We printed out some of the more extreme things she posted, and we still invited her to the interview. Oh, and did I mention my boss is Japanese? So she comes into the interview, which I was a part of. I asked 3 good things about her, which she says she's dependent, she gets things done, and she's friendly. My boss looks at her for a second before he pulls out her tweets and asks her to explain how can friendly serve the local community if she hates it so much. Karen was floored. She said someone had hacked into her account, despite there being at least 3 years of slanderous tweets. We thanked her for coming in and said we can't accept an employee with this conduct. As far as I know, she's still not working because some spouses found her Twitter not long after the interview and was shared in all departments. No one will touch her application now. And there you have it, folks. Because one person couldn't mind their damn business, they lost a potential job and had their social media exposed. It's super ironic, since she became the dependopotamus and the adulterer, the same thing she was accusing me of. My friends, it's always funny how the people who accuse others of misconduct the loudest are usually the ones engaging in said misconduct themselves. Listen guys, somebody should have served Karen a nice warm glass of mind your own damn business at that Starbucks. Making wild accusations like that is just absurd. And I'm actually still left speechless from this story, guys. One of the most ridiculous stories that I've read in a really, really long time. And I know I say that a lot, but this one is actually really up there. Now guys, if you think that story was absurd, wait until you hear this one. So back in 2006, I worked for one of those big box stores that had an IT desk, where people could bring devices in to get serviced if there was a problem. We're located in Columbus, which is right over a bridge from Phoenix City. Now this is important because where our store was placed, we would normally get a lot of servicemen and women come up from Fort Benning, who were generally pretty cool. But sometimes we would get entitled idiots or dummies who were, let's just say, slightly unfavorable to folks of a certain skin color or gender. Now, I'm a 5'1" girl who, at the time, weighed a total of 120 pounds soaking wet. I was practically a hobbit. I was also one of the lead technicians in the department. The team I worked with was amazing. The general manager of the store was great, and the supervisor of my department was the man. I would regularly go for drinks with these people, and it's one of the best places I've ever worked, even though it was retail. One day, I'm working the counter, and in comes, let's call him Joe. He wore a cut-off t-shirt, worn denim jeans, and a baseball cap with a Confederate flag on it that just barely covered his business in the front, party in the back haircut. Now, I'm not one to judge on looks. I've had plenty of people come in looking exactly the same, but were an absolute delight to work with. Never judge a book by its cover, kids. But I still have my defenses up just in case. I really hoped it wasn't gonna go to the not-so-friendly route, and I was unfortunately wrong about dear Joe. Joe walks up to the counter with his PC tower and practically slams the unit on the desk. Before I can even say anything, he screams at me and demands I have someone take a look at it. He says, "Hey woman, I need this fixed. It's broken." I told him, "Okay sir, let me have a look at it and I'll see if I can." Joe cuts me off and stares at me with a disgusted look on his face, and he says, "Excuse me?" I then told him, "If you give me a moment sir, I'll be able to take a look at your computer," and oh hell no. I'm not letting a woman take a look at this. So it was at this point that I realized where this was inevitably gonna go wrong. I told him, "Unfortunately, sir, I won't be able to give you an estimate if you don't let me diagnose your computer." Joe responds, "There's no way in hell a woman knows anything about computers. I'm not letting you touch my computer. I would rather take it back home. Get me the manager." Oh, yes, I thought. This is gonna be awesome. I'm pretty sure he wanted to talk to the general manager of the store, but I couldn't resist. Now, I could have pulled the I'm the manager thing because I was actually one of the senior staff. But my direct boss was actually out back working on repair projects, and I couldn't help but to get excited about how this was gonna go down. Me, as lovely as Sweet Tea said, "Of course, sir, right away." Mike, my supervisor, the guy who ran our department, was elbow deep in a motherboard replacement when I walked in and gave him the biggest smile. I said, "Hey Mike, there's a guy out there asking for the manager." Now, he looks at me confused because he was just my supervisor, but then I proceeded to tell him exactly what was waiting for him out front, and his face split into the brightest smile. He then proceeded to walk out front. Now, have I mentioned that Mike is a 6'3", 280-pound black man who looked like he could eat a Mack truck for lunch? He was such a big, lovable teddy bear. We all adored him. The moment Mike stepped out, the customer freaked. Mike said, "Hello, sir. I heard there's a problem?" And Joe lost it. It started with a, "Oh no, no," before devolving into a racist tirade that I have never witnessed in my life. Like a car crash, I just couldn't look away. Joe kept screaming, using the nastiest slur over and over again while the staff and customers alike watched in blatant horror. Security ended up having to come over to try to calm the man down. Our entire security team was black as well, so naturally, Joe went even more crazy. Eventually, the police had to be called because the man was threatening me and threatening security and my boss using that word, and that word is not okay. My GM got called out of his office and immediately called the police to have the man removed. God bless whoever was watching over us that day because 2 black officers came to the scene. Me and my general manager were literally the only white people involved in this train wreck, and I watched with unbridled glee as Joe was cuffed and taken away by police. Watching Joe foam at the mouth as he was dragged away made my whole week. Thank you for the entertainment, bigoted Joe. Guys, I absolutely love this story. This is one of the stories where you kind of think, okay, there's no way that it can get worse, and it just kept getting worse. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our slash entitled people. Guys, we friggin' survived another one. Just when you think the stories can't possibly get more insane, they somehow do. If you guys enjoyed the stories today, do leave a thumbs up, and if you missed the last episode, I will link it right here. A Karen and her group of friends uses "Don't you know who I am?" and it backfires. It backfires hard. Guys, check it out if you haven't, and I'll see you guys in the next one. I love you.